I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling, but out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi everyone, welcome back to Outside the Therapy Room. Today we are joined by Tonya, the owner of Clarity Counseling and Mediation. Hi Tonya, how are you?
I am great. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. We were talking a little bit about it before we started, but we have been connecting digitally, virtually, by email and in social media for a while now.
Yeah.
And it's so exciting to get to meet you in person.
Yes, it's great. It's been great getting to know you through, the different digital means, and now it's even better to see you face to face and talk face to face.
It has been fun having a podcast and having fun guests outside of New Moon Counseling and getting a chance to meet people in person again.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Like you said, I'm the owner of Clarity Counseling and Mediation. We are located in downtown Cambridge, and we opened earlier this year. We support students and adults of all ages as well as families. Yeah, so we are a pretty small practice. I have a couple of clinicians that work with me that also see teens and adults, and we really approach counseling from an integrative approach. So we do not specialize in just one modality. We really operate from the premise of using what makes sense and what works best for clients.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks.
And you've been in the field a lot longer than just the beginning of this year, so we'll get to hear a little bit of your expertise on our topic today. But because we are outside the therapy room, we want to hear a little bit about what you enjoy doing outside of work.
Yeah, so outside of work, I am married. I've been married for a long time to my high school sweetheart, and we have 3 daughters who keep us very busy. We also have 4 dogs.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, we started with 1, and now we are stopping definitely at 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, very busy. But yeah, I like to do a lot of different things. I really enjoy reading and learning, so I'm always reading for work, reading for pleasure. I also am a certified personal trainer, so I really believe in the importance of and in the connection of physical health and mental health. So I teach a couple of kind of beginner and entry-level classes at a local wellness center, and I like to keep active. I think it's good for my mental health. It's good for aging. Yeah, so there's that. And yeah, I like hiking and being with my family
And your 4 dogs.
And my 4 dogs, yep.
I'm sure they keep you busy on walks and everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
They like to be active, so
Yeah, well, thank you again for being here. This is very exciting. And today we are talking about social media and mental health, which is a big topic area, right? Especially because social media is such a huge thing now.
Yes.
And we literally have computers attached to our hands all the time. We hear a lot, I think, both inside and outside the therapy room about, I need to take a social media break, or I can't stop scrolling on my phone, or now there's new terms like doom scrolling. And there's a lot about social media and how it's kind of invaded our lives in some way.
Yes, for good and bad. Yes.
For good and bad. So that is our topic today. So what did you want to share about social media just as an introduction?
Yeah, I think that social media is something that very few people can get away from being a part of. I do have a few people I know personally, and then I have a few clients that just have decided that that's not something they want to have as a part of their life, and that seems to work well. But I think that for the majority of people, whether it's for business, whether it's for keeping up to date with family, with friends, it is an important part of our life. And I'm always trying to challenge binary thinking. So it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. There are definitely pieces that are really positive about social media, and obviously there's more negative pieces. So I think that as long as we're aware of that, we can definitely be mindful and intentional on how we use social media for good, and then also try to buffer and limit or minimize some of the more negative or harmful pieces of social media.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, I'm on for the business, so the New Moon, and now with like Outside the Therapy Room has an Instagram page, and I have a love-hate relationship with social media.
Yes.
Personally, it's fun because like some of the factors that you mentioned about connecting with loved ones and seeing cool pictures or catching up on like celebrities I'm interested about or different topics, like whatever it could be, it's a really nice way to have that sense of connection. But as a creator piece of it, from like the business side of it for both my practice and the podcast, it can be so frustrating, especially when we're looking at likes and how much engagement. And that's where I feel I get really frustrated with social media, because I put this effort into creating this really engaging post that then the algorithm doesn't show it to people. And so where I think, and this is something I've talked to clients about as well, is, you know, you're not, it doesn't matter how many likes you get. Don't kind of connect your sense of worth with how many hearts or how many people have seen it. And then me having to repeat that to myself when I'm trying to make a post and I'm like, oh my God, only 2 people have seen it, or I've only gotten 2 likes.
Right.
And so when I catch myself getting that frustrated, I'm like, okay, I need to maybe take a step back, because I'm really getting frustrated with social media. But these kind of things can happen, and I think that can lead to burnout if we're putting a lot of focus on the content that we are seeing. Because there's good things, like some of the things I mentioned, catching up with family or with celebrities or sports or fashion or makeup tutorials, like all of these really cool things that we can learn from social media. There's also a lot of negative things on social media. We didn't. The States just had an election. There's a lot of stuff that's being put on social media, and it can be hard to escape when you're scrolling.
Yes, absolutely. And I think understanding how algorithms are created and then recognizing that the more you, sort of like anxiety, the more you focus in on something, the more you're looking and Googling things, the more likely you're going to have that come up in your social media, in your advertising, ads that you're seeing, those sorts of things. But
which is terrifying.
Yeah, which is, because then it gives you a disproportionate amount of information about any one topic, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, that can be stressful even if it's a good thing. You know, I know that there's been times where I've thought about, oh, I should travel to Italy, right? And, you know, what starts off as an innocent Google search, suddenly then I'm on Instagram and I'm having ads come up for that, or I'm having different things really bombarding my social media feed. And then it gets kind of stuck in my head, right? And that can be really stressful.
Yeah, and we're talking about an Italy trip. Imagine Googling something else and just being bombarded with those images.
Yeah.
So why don't we start talking about that digital burnout? So we're kind of speaking about that now, kind of, you know, at the end of the day, scrolling and doing something mindless can be a way of relaxation, or at least, I don't know about you, but I've heard people say that. Like, at the end of the day, I just want to lay and scroll through my phone, and that's kind of my way to recharge. But sometimes that can lead to that burnout, depending on what kind of content we're being exposed to.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I say to clients all the time, there definitely can be, I think, a relaxing piece to just kind of distracting yourself. You know, like you said, you know, if you're doing, maybe you're having a stressful job or you've had a stressful day, suddenly you're looking at pictures of or videos of dogs, right? Or makeup tutorials or anything of that nature. But if you're noticing that, you know, paying attention to how you're feeling in your body, right? So if you're noticing that maybe your stomach is hurting a little bit, or your chest feels a little bit tight, or your thoughts are racing, you know, it's really time to kind of sit back and think about, is this really relaxing? Is this really, am I really enjoying this? You know I support a lot of people who end up talking about really stressed because they're realizing, you know, our cell phones can now tell us how long we've been online or how long we've been on certain apps for. And it's like, you know, really being taken aback and surprised that, wow, I spent like 3.5 hours on TikTok, right? And I didn't get to do A, B, C, D, and E that I needed to get done. And then that causes, you know, increased levels of anxiety, increased levels of stress. So I think it's really about trying to be intentional in our use and being mindful of what we're watching and what we're ingesting. And, you know, I don't think it's a perfect formula for everybody, but it's, you know, really paying attention to how does it feel how is it impacting your life, and do you need to put maybe some parameters or some boundaries around it for yourself?
And I think, as you said, that the like addictive properties of social media, like the scrolling with your thumb and the constant new content that you're seeing, it does kind of give you like a dopamine boost in that moment, because you're like, ooh, new stuff, and you're kind of absorbing all of that, which again, that's kind of what may add to the difficulty of letting that go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of research and evidence that's out there now that shows that it does fire off the reward centers of our brain, right? And then the more that we're doing that, the more that we need to do those behaviors to get the same dopamine release. So it ends up becoming a really vicious cycle. So again, there's lots of different strategies, in terms of distress tolerance, in terms of, just really being mindful and intentional, just to kind of moderate that for ourselves, so that it's a healthy use of it.
Yeah. What's distress tolerance for folks who may not know what that is?
Yeah. So distress tolerance, if you're paying attention and you're noticing that maybe the amount of social media that you're consuming is causing you to be maybe more anxious or causing you to experience some physiological symptoms of stress. Distress tolerance are different strategies that we can put in to be more comfortable in the discomfort of maybe holding off on something that we're wanting to do. So I support a lot of teenagers, and one of the things I suggest is, you can put an alarm on your phone, right? A timer.
Yeah.
So I was reading an article the other day where it said that a lot of teenagers will check their phones over 300 times a day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can do the math on that, but it's, try even setting an alarm for 15 minutes, right? Put your phone down and go for a walk without your phone, right? And hopefully the timer, and knowing the timer is set, will give you some boundaries on knowing, okay, that's the period of time that I've agreed to not be on my phone. And then it's also, I think, kind of cool to really sit back and think about how does it feel in my body to actually follow that boundary and to not pick up my phone during that 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But the longer that we do that, you can start off at 15 minutes, do 20 minutes, 25. The longer we do that, the easier it does become, because we end up getting used to feeling that discomfort in our body, and it becomes less uncomfortable.
Yeah, we talk about timers in our procrastination podcast and how we love timers.
Yes.
Well, I really enjoy timers, but it can kind of just be that reminder. But then the other thing is actually holding yourself accountable to putting your phone down. And I think that's what you mean, right? Being able to reflect afterwards to say, that actually felt good.
Yeah.
I got to go outside and get some fresh air, or I got to read a book I've been waiting to read because I was able to hold myself accountable. That's where that reward feeling comes back in. And
absolutely,
then we're able to do that again another time.
Yeah.
A client let me know that there's something on phones now where you can do an app restriction, and so it actually shuts down the app.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
They taught me something new.
Yeah.
But that's another way to kind of set boundaries around, how long you're going to be on certain apps.
Yeah. You can set limits on how long you want to be on particular apps, and I always say it's kind of cool to experiment with, because a lot of times we don't even realize how habitual some of these patterns are, right? So, I think for most kids, you'd think, oh yeah, I could be off my phone for a half hour. Okay, we'll try it, right? Just for fun, right? How does that feel, right? What did you notice different? And again, the FOMO, fear of missing out. A lot of kids and adults are on their phone all the time because they're worried about missing out.
Yeah.
But that's an anxious belief, right? And we can reinforce that by feeding into that belief and being on our phones all the time. But that's not an accurate reality. For most people, you can be off your phone for an hour and the world is not going to end, right?
Yeah.
But testing that out is kind of fun.
That is really interesting. And speaking of FOMO, I think, sometimes we're on our phones because we don't want to miss out, but sometimes we're on our phones and we feel FOMO because we're seeing people go
fear of
to
missing out in real life.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So you spoke a little bit about recognizing that distress tolerance, being able to recognize when being on our phones or being on social media is increasing our stress or our anxiety. So how does social media contribute to our anxiety?
Well, I think that can happen in different ways. I think that, again, if you are, especially if there's heavy things going on in the world, like, for example, the election, if that's something that you care deeply about or you're invested in, and you're maybe searching for different, articles or videos on that topic, and your algorithm then populates that over and over again, you're going to be inundated with something that you're interested in, but to a really large, again, like a disproportionate amount of information. So I think when it's like there can be too much of a good thing, even if it's something that you're wanting to hear, right? So I think that if you're not paying attention to that and you're not trying to diversify what you're looking at, you can just become really hyper fixated and hyper focused on one area, which I think that in and of itself just can create a lot of stress.
And I think, like, we laughed about FOMO, but that can also increase our anxiety if we're making comparisons. I think this is something I hear a lot more, from individuals who are comparing their lives to how somebody has curated their lives on Instagram. And I say curated because it's very selective.
Absolutely.
What they're choosing to post, the filters they put on it, the lighting, all of the thought that goes into it, and then comparing their lives to it, which can again increase that anxiety to be like, well, I'm not that kind of parent. I don't give my kids these, dinosaur shaped sandwiches. Like, that's just not something I'm doing. So maybe I'm not a good enough mom, or like it can kind of spiral from there and then increase that anxiety level. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I've had this conversation a lot with clients where even though we know that it's like we tend to post the highlights of our life.
Yeah.
So even though we know people are curating kind of the best of their lives in their social media, it still can impact how we see ourselves, how we, our self-worth, how we are as a friend, a mother, a partner. So that to me is fascinating, because even though we know that it's not a full representation of that person's life, we still are impacted by it. So I think that's pretty important to recognize.
So there's a lot that can kind of come from anxiety. And I think sometimes when we're feeling anxiety outside of social media, we go to social media as a way to try to cope.
Right.
But as we just shared, sometimes it doesn't really help us cope, because now we're just witnessing all of these things that can be really challenging. And so it actually adds to our anxiety. And then, then it can be really uncomfortable and be really impactful for us and our behavior and how we respond in our environment. So whether that's laying on the couch and your family's there, or you're at a gathering, it can just really increase that anxiety and those symptoms that we can get with anxiety.
Well, I think that's where it's important to try to get out of our heads and really pay attention to what's happening in our bodies.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we're just, responding from a cognitive place, we might not really realize the impact or the toll whatever we're consuming is having on us. Right? So, and again, I don't think we ever want to encourage people to avoid feeling discomfort or distress, but also, we live in a pretty fast-paced, highly overstimulating world. And so just really paying attention to when is enough, and how do I know that in my body, and what can I do, what tools can I use to help support myself, support my mental health and my mental well-being.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about the ways that anxiety, like that social media can increase or cause us to feel anxious. But I think that there are some benefits but some pros maybe to social media. And I know I have a lot of family in Peru. And so being able to kind of see snapshots of their lives on social media is really nice. And having like aunts and cousins and uncles in Peru be able to see my kiddos grow up, and like things that I post on my personal page, like that can build that sense of community and connection. Absolutely. Whereas we previously previously didn't have that. It would be like a phone call on a landline, and I don't want to talk to relatives on the landline, Mom. Like, it would be this whole thing. And so now it is kind of nice to still feel that sense of connection to people. And my husband and I have a lot of friends that live all over the world. We have some friends in Dubai and some friends in Spain. And so it's really nice to be able to see their lives and, you know, where they're traveling to, and that can just really ignite that connection. And when we see them face to face, that is an opportunity for us to discuss what they posted. Like, how was that hike that you took on that really cool mountain, or the desert trip that you took in Dubai? Like, it can create that sense of connection and community within my own friends.
Well, and again, I would say, and I can see, just because, you know, clearly you're smiling, your eyes are wide, you're happy, right? So that feels good, right? And so I think that absolutely tells you that that's a positive thing. But I would say, you know, if you were noticing that you were spending maybe an inordinate amount of time, you know, looking and watching friends and family's pictures, and then over a period of time you're feeling more sad, or you're feeling, you know, lonely or disconnected or isolated here. Again, that doesn't mean don't look at them, but it might mean...
It's like the limits.
Yeah.
Like recognizing those limits. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because sometimes I am going to Sam, my husband, being like, oh my God, we need to go to Dubai. Why are we in Dubai? So yeah, sometimes...
And then you start getting ads on your phone for
And
Dubai.
then I start seeing all of the Dubai ads. But yeah, I think even just aside from having family and friends in other parts of the world that you're able to connect with, I think some content on social media can make us feel less alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are real online communities that I would say have definite benefits to mental health. You know, I know that some parents that I support will want to completely take away their teens' access to online gaming sites or social media sites. And, you know, I, again, really challenge that all or nothing. And it's 2024, we went through a pandemic where a lot of services and a lot of activities moved to a virtual space. And as a result, there are real relationships existing in virtual environments. And I think it can be harmful to completely eliminate that especially from teenagers, where that's their main source that's where they're identifying their community as being. And I think we just have to, I don't think we can minimize or discount the validity of those relationships and the importance of those relationships to teenagers specifically, but adults as well.
I mean, we met through social media.
Right. Like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we're meeting in person, but it doesn't feel like it's the first time we're meeting.
Right. Like, we've already developed that connection through social media. And I think I think I mentioned this with Melissa too in our episode on IFS, like we've kind of been cheering each other on through social media, through all of these changes and growths that we've all had in our practices. And so, for teens, taking that away I understand the reaction, because it's like they're losing their worlds, right?
Yeah. And if it's distressing to adults to think about that, knowing we're, you know, our brains are fully developed and we understand, you know, some of those connections with a teen that doesn't have all that brain development happening, it's going to seem even more distressing. So
yeah, and I think again, as that sense of connection, there's some really funny Instagram creators out there, and they say, like, they create this great content and it's so funny, but you're also like, yeah, that's me, or oh my God, I feel the same way. And so just even having, like, sometimes it feels really isolating when we're experiencing challenges. Like, mom guilt is huge. And I think all moms have felt that at some point or another. And so seeing a funny reel about mom guilt in a way that is comical and real, it makes us feel seen. It makes us feel less alone. And so again, this is something for adults, but for teens or, you know, anyone on social media, like, those are some of those connections that can happen, that can feel, you know, good, and you can feel seen and validated in some way.
Well, and I think also, you mentioned a good point. I think it also kind of gives some levity to some of the parts of being a mom or being a partner or being a friend that you might kind of beat yourself up about. But it's like, oh, you know what? I sent one to my husband this morning, actually, and it said something about in every relationship, there has to be a calm person and an extremely dramatic person, right?
Yeah.
So I sent that to him just like, guess who's who? So, yeah, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, I think there's a lot of serious stuff and important things going on in the world, but I think that you're right. Some of the reels, some of the TikToks, it gives us a chance to laugh, right? It gives us a way to connect and not feel alone or feel like we're the only person doing or feeling whatever we're feeling.
Again, sharing those memes with your partner.
Yeah.
That we talk about, I think, in the female friendship one, but like there are some friendships that literally it's just sending each other memes, and
Absolutely.
that feels like a connection.
Yes.
I have a young teen client who's like, I have my group of friends, and then I have some other friends that we like, our whole communication thread is just sending each other memes, and we laugh and we respond to it, but I know that that person cares about me because they're sending me a meme that reminded them of me, or like it can kind of, again, just,
it's communication.
Yeah, it's communication.
Yeah, right. And I know I support people where they have felt sadness when someone isn't stopped sending them, like, you know, memes or reels. And it's been interesting to even talk it through with them, because they will say, you know what, we don't even really talk, but it's like we're on the same wavelength, right? And it's just a little something to be like, yeah, I know that they're thinking of me, right? I know I have, again, I love books, I love dogs, and I have people friends and family who we don't exchange a lot of words necessarily, but out of the blue, they'll send me like a Christmas tree made of books, right?
Aww, yeah.
And it's always, I don't know, it's really touching, because I think, wow, you know, out of all the things that are going on in that person's day, or in all the people and friends that they have, they saw this and it made them think of me, and it also meant enough that they took the time to send it to me.
Yeah, like,
right?
Tonya's gonna enjoy this.
Which I think is cool, right?
Yeah,
so,
it is really nice.
Yeah.
So how does social media activate the brain's reward system? Because these are rewards, right, that we receive. We feel really good about receiving that funny TikTok from a friend, or we feel less alone when we see something that feels really relatable to us. So these can sometimes be like that reward system, that little boost that we're feeling. So how does social media affect it in other ways? And what are kind of like the pros and cons of it?
Well, I think that when we are looking or engaging with something online that we're interested in, that we enjoy, absolutely, it's going to trigger that reward center in our brain. And again, I think that it's good until it's not good, right? So if you're noticing that, typically what happens is when that reward center is being activated and we keep doing it, it takes more and more time, and it takes more and more consumption of whatever it is to activate that reward center, right? So I think that just explains that something can feel good until it doesn't, and then that's when the symptoms of stress and anxiety and also depression come in, because if something that made you feel good, it's like anything, it's like food, exercise, sex, any of those things, when you're not able to feel the way something originally made you feel, it can impact your mood, right? And it can also impact potentially your self-worth, your self-esteem, because you start wondering, why am I not feeling the same way?
Yeah.
You know, what am I doing wrong? And again, there's a lot of shame and guilt around the overconsumption of social media. There's lots of people that know that they're on their phone way too much, or they're consuming. I know I absolutely have been guilty of that, where you're not fully present in real life, or you're not fully connected, right? And I'm sure, you know, as a business owner, you know, not everybody realizes that you're on your phone or you're on your laptop, because there is something you have to respond to in terms of your business, right? But again, I think that's also where mom guilt comes in, because you know, your kids are trying to show you stuff, you're trying to respond to a client email, or you're trying to, you know, release the podcast, and there's some things that are time limited, right? And it's hard to be in 10 places at once. And
Yeah, it is. And I think from a lot of couples that I see, there's that that guilt and shame is kind of thrown at them because it's like, you spend so much time on your phone. Our kids are wanting to connect, or I want to connect with you, and there's barrier between us, and that can create a lot of conflict in a relationship. But sometimes there's not that awareness that they may also be on their phone, and so you know, it's kind of like a double barrier that's happening, and so it can be a tricky place. And I think a lot, I agree, like there can be a lot of that shame around the quantity of time that they're spending on social media.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think it's a good opportunity to communicate about connection and disconnection, right? Because I know I see a lot of couples too where they'll say, one person will say, well, you're on your phone all the time. And then that person retorts with, well, you're on your phone all the time. Well, I'm on my phone because you're on your phone. And it's like, okay, at the core, obviously, both people are wanting to feel more connected.
Yeah.
They're both identifying that there's things that are getting in the way of that. So that's the goal, is how do we increase the connection, right? Not let's blame, you know, each other for all the ways that we're disengaging, or it's not like the blame game. It's like, okay, clearly something is going on here, but what can we do to increase the connection? And again, it's good experiments. You know what? I was seeing on an ad the other day on social media. But like a cage, right, with a lock, and it's like, okay, it's going to be date night. We're both going to put our phones in, you know, this cage. And again, I think it's kind of cool to think about and to talk about how does that feel, right? And again, most people in the beginning, especially when people that I've supported will say it is distressing, but the longer they're doing that and the more often they're doing that, the more freeing it is, and the less it's less distressing. So
I mean, I'm guilty of making the comment, like, if I lost my phone, I don't know where I would be, because literally everything is on there. But it is distressing, but it's also being mindful, like, there's a purpose for this. It's for me to connect with my partner, with my kids, or with myself, to like have that time that I'm not being distracted by what's on social media. And then the thing I love the most is being able to reflect back on it, like you shared, right? Like, how did that feel for me? It was uncomfortable the first 5 minutes, but then after that, I really got into my book, and I actually ended up going overtime from like my timer, right? Like, having that reflection afterwards, I think, is the most important piece, just to kind of be able to check in on how you were doing. And if it wasn't very positive, then at least you can say, like, well, I didn't like it. It was super uncomfortable that whole time, but I did it. And maybe next time I can just keep it the same and see how I feel at that point.
Well, and test it out, right? Like, I know I bought a Kindle on Amazon Prime Days, thanks to my social media advertising. But, you know, my kids were like, I have a pretty large iPad, right? They're like, well, why don't you could just download the Kindle app and use that? And I was like, no, I want something just to be able to read, right? Because I was noticing, even when I was reading books on my phone or my iPad, notifications would come up, right? Or I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to quickly check this. And even though I have the capability to be able to go on the internet on my Kindle, I shut that off. So, and it's been really interesting to see how less distracted I am when I'm reading, how I'm able to not be on my phone as much, how I'm just feeling more relaxed when I'm reading. I don't have that, you know, if there's pop-ups, and even if you're choosing not to read them, the notifications, you're still seeing them, right?
There's like a sense of urgency. I don't know if you get that, but I do.
Absolutely, yes.
So but it's funny though, because I think, I don't remember at what point, but there was this big, huge thing that was happening on social media that was, you know, just because you are available doesn't mean you're accessible, right? And I think we all have our phones on us so much. We're all on social media. At some point during the day, and I know I'm guilty of this, texting my husband and him not replying forever. And I'm like, you're always on your phone. Why can't you just check my phone? And I'm like, no, you're practicing good boundaries. Like, you were focusing on your meeting. I kind of have to take myself back a little bit, but it's that, right? It's a sense of urgency when you're seeing those notifications pop up, or you're seeing like a new post that's going to be out on social media, or an announcement that someone's going to make. Like, there's that urgency to be present for that. And again, the more that you are responding instantaneously, right, the more your brain believes that's what you need to do. And also,
the more the people in your lives expect that to happen, right? So I think that just really speaks to the importance of trying to put in some boundaries and put in some limits. And again, it might be uncomfortable in the beginning, but try it out. See, does it feel less stressful, once those practices are in place?
Yeah, and it's practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not perfection.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So, and then, when you slip back a bit, again, paying attention. Does this feel good? Is this, supporting the life that I'm wanting to live? Is this adding to my life? Is this taking away?
I think one thing we haven't really touched on much that I think is really important is comments. I think some people go into the comments and it's so negative.
Right.
And then that can be where a lot of the anxiety comes up. So an example from my personal life, something that someone mentioned to me in my life was, they go on a page and they're like, wow, that girl's so pretty. I love her dress. She looks so great. Goes into the comments and sees a bunch of people bashing this woman and then them absorbing that information towards themselves. So if they think this about this woman, then I don't see myself as beautiful or whatever as this person. Right. So now I feel worse. And that's impacting like our self-esteem and our sense of self and our body image. Like all of it kind of comes flooding in. And I think those comments can be really hard.
Yeah, I know there's more and more people and sites that are restricting comments or limiting comments.
Yeah.
I think also, again, paying attention. If you are someone that is going to, when you're reading comments, you're noticing that you're feeling angry, you're feeling upset, you're feeling some of those somatic symptoms in your stomach and your chest. Try not reading the comments, or again, putting limits on how many comments you read, right? Paying attention to, if it's getting distressing to you, then that's giving you a message, right?
Yeah, and something I had to share with a client that I was supporting too was you don't need to respond.
Absolutely.
Right?
No response is a response.
Exactly. Like you can read it, you can acknowledge it's there and that it sucks, and then move on.
Yeah.
So it's just, setting those boundaries and those limitations for yourself so that you can take care of you. Yeah. Because what is it going to do to the person on the other end of their phone, right? Like probably not much. It's not going to change them if you educate them on, a view that they may have. And so it's just, being able to focus in on you.
Yeah, exactly. If people are interested in having, a conversation and hearing different perspectives, then that might be a conversation you want to partake in. But if it's a conversation where someone's just going to criticize or just tell you what you're doing wrong, then again, no response is a response.
Yeah.
And again, that's where our brain, we can kind of get into that really unhealthy cycle of becoming dysregulated, commenting, going in this negative loop. And then the more we're commenting, the more we're wanting to comment. It's just really, again, I think it comes down a lot to being really mindful and being intentional in choosing what you're going to engage in and what you're not going to engage in. And like you said, really considering the impact of both those options on your mental health.
Yeah, and pausing. I think let's pause before I choose to respond, or let me pause before I hit send. Is this really something that is going to be helpful for me? Yeah, I think that pausing can be huge.
Especially if we're becoming activated in the moment. Yeah. Right? So giving ourselves time just to pause, to relax, to become regulated, and then responding knowing that we're using those thinking parts of our brain. Yeah. We're not just emotionally responding and being reactive.
Yeah. Another piece that we were talking a little bit before we were recording is there's pros and cons, which I think we've kind of jumped both ways so far. And I think there's also a lot of pros and cons with therapy, speak, or mental health information on social media. And on one hand, it's a pro because it's helpful, it's educating, it's like that psychoeducation that we're providing, it's validating, you're learning something new, you're kind of having that reminder of what, yes, I experienced trauma and I'm capable of moving through that in a way. There can be so many tools that we can learn from social media. And then on the other hand, something that I shared from my life was some of those comments or some of these generalizations that can be made can be damaging or harmful. I think I shared like seeing on social media something about, you know, if you were mature for your age, or, you know, all of these kind of comments, like if you got like, oh, you're a little adult when you were younger, then you probably experienced trauma and were parentified in some way.
Right.
And then for me, personal life, I'm like, oh my God, my kiddo's like an old person.
Right.
What did I do to create trauma? Like, what kind of trauma did I cause in my kiddo for him to be this old soul?
Right.
And I remember like I actually did get quite worried about that. And I talked to my husband and I'm like, oh my God, social media says like, our son must be a parentified child because of all this. And he's like, no, he was literally born an old man. Like he's, you know, he enjoys the company of adults. He likes to play and do those things, but sometimes we do laugh at him. He's like a little adult and we have to remind him that he's a kid. But that was really scary for me. And it did send me into a spiral of like, oh my God, what did I do to my kid?
Right.
But I was able to talk to my support system and then, you know, take a step back and be like, okay, Yvonne, like,
Yeah.
this was one comment on social media. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the truth for you.
Totally.
But I think for, you know, individuals who maybe don't have a support system or who aren't able to kind of access that more rational part of their brain, it can be really harmful.
Absolutely.
For them to just absorb this content that they're hearing and self-diagnose or, you know, become really, really fearful and isolate themselves because they think they have trauma bonds with people in their lives, right? Like, there's a lot of that that's happening too.
Yeah, and you know, I think that there's a lot of, again, some of the information, especially if it's from qualified professionals that are commenting in their scope of practice, that can be helpful, or that you can use to go to health professional to inquire about. But I think there are a lot of generalizations that are made. I think that a lot of things are taken out of context or are really fragmented, and that can be super damaging. You know, then you have people diagnosing themselves and the people in their lives, and not with accuracy. Right. And you're right. If you don't have a support system, or you don't have a therapist or a doctor or a psychologist where you can really process through what you're questioning, what information that you're using to kind of feed into those questions, it can be really harmful. Right. Because then, you know, as a parent, you could be thinking that you've traumatized your child, or that you've created harm to yourself or to the people around you. And I think that, again, that's going to cause stress. That's going to cause anxiety. Yeah. And that can be really super damaging to mental health.
And I think I keep referring back to other episodes we've talked about, but in our boundary episode with Destiny, we talked about therapy speak. And, you know, there's so much on that on social media, which is wonderful to be able to acknowledge, like, oh, this is a boundary, or, you know, this is what I can do for self-care. But a lot of the times that then can be used in a negative way as a form of like manipulation or control for someone else. So this is my boundary. You can't dress that way. Or this is my boundary. You can't do this. When in reality, that's not actually a boundary.
Absolutely.
But the therapy speak of using the word boundary in these ways that they absorb from social media can be then harmful for their relationships.
Yeah. People can then weaponize therapeutic language or diagnoses, right? So I know that I've supported people where they've come and an ex-partner has really taken some information off of Reels or TikToks and have really made the other person question their self-worth, question their intentions, question, you know, and it can really create just a tailspin. And so, you know I've spent time with clients really teasing that apart and looking at whatever has been said or thrown at them in a more accurate, broader context.
So how can we as adults now model responsible social media use to our younger population where social media, they've literally been raised with social media. And so how can we kind of create or model healthy boundaries around social media or healthy use of social media?
I think that, you know, especially if we're talking about parents, it's really honest communication, right? I know that even for myself, if my kids have commented that I've been on my phone a lot, there's a defensive part of me that comes out, right? And I try to, there's absolutely times where I've tried to deny that versus, again, pausing. Yeah, you're right. You know what? Talking about what would you like to see different, or just owning, yeah, I'm going to put my phone down. You're important to me. What you're saying to me is important to me. Let's take some, undistracted time, and how about we both do that? Which sometimes that is always also interesting, because sometimes then, say my daughter doesn't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think that's always a good conversation to have. I think also sharing and talking about researching data that is coming out that is factual and talks about really the risks and why. So it's not just, I know my kids they even in high school they have their phone shut off, and most of their friends don't, and they think it's unfair, obviously. But then I end up explaining, like, it's not a punishment. It's not, because you've done something wrong, and really talking about the reasons why, right?
Yeah.
And again, they don't have to agree, but I'm just not making this, I don't have that in place at my home because I'm trying to ruin their lives, right?
Right, yeah.
But it's because developmentally, kids do not have the ability to regulate their phone use. Adults rarely can do that, right? And that's why we hear about kids being on their phone till 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And I know we've talked about FOMO. There's a big piece of that.
Yeah.
Plus the addictive component of being on your phone. Then it interrupts sleep, and that interferes and impacts education, right? Which is why I think we're seeing a big movement this year in school boards across the province of really clamping down on cell phone use in the classroom, which I think is a positive thing. But yeah, I really think it's about having those conversations and looking at different ways that as a family you can agree to be more engaged, be more present, and be respectful of your phone use and then the rest of the family's phone use.
Part of that boundary can be having things be part of a routine. So like at dinner, we're going to do no phones at dinner. And then that just becomes an expectation of like, okay, we put our phones down, we're present with each other for dinner, and there's more of that face-to-face connection and hearing about each other's day. Or, we're going to leave our phones off when we're getting ready for bed, and we put it in its own space. And so obviously, like, that's going to come back with like maybe some pushback on that rule. But if you're also modeling that you are listening to this new rule, then it can be a really nice thing to do as a family together.
Yeah.
I think also communication is really important in education. Like teaching our kiddos why they need, not just telling them, oh, because I said so, but like actually putting the facts, right? Like you said, all of the research.
Yeah.
Because then that is like, oh, okay, wait, my mom's saying this because they care about me and want me to get a good sleep so that I'm good for the next day.
Yeah.
Instead of, my mom's punishing me and taking my phone away. So depending on how we approach the conversation and the conversation and the example that we're putting forth on boundaries, it can allow it to be a more calm and respectful kind of way to have those boundaries set.
Well, and I think also part of that conversation is, joining in and saying, as an adult, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
And then also, again, challenging that like binary thinking of, in our house, it all is based around kind of progress reports and report cards, right?
Yeah.
If it's, 10 o'clock and the progress report comes in and you're demonstrating that you're able to do the things that you need to do, then I'm happy to negotiate that. Let's try 11 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
I always laugh because my oldest is going to be 25, and in grade 12, she's my first. She convinced me, very persuasive, that, you know what, I'm the only person I know at my school that has to hand their phone in. I said, okay, that's fair. It was first semester. I took the parameters off of handing her phone in. And sure enough, by the progress reports, even she was able to really agree that it was too hard to navigate staying off her phone and doing the things that she needed to do. So then she willingly handed in her phone. So I thought that was pretty cool, especially in high school.
And
right?
it depends, like giving her a sense of independence.
Yeah.
And then, independence to be like, well, wait a second, this isn't working so great. Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes we have to give our kids the ability to see, right? Like, it's not, see, I told you so, I was right. It's, no, like developmentally, it's really challenging for teenagers to be able to moderate their use of anything, really. So,
yeah.
And I'm doing this to help you to get to your goals and what you're wanting.
Exactly. Yeah, you guys are working together as a team.
Yeah, It's not a punishment.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many more things I think we could talk about, like cyberbullying and like boundaries around that, and parents creating a safe, educating their kiddos on safety on social media, but that may have to be a conversation for another day.
Yes.
I think this topic again is so broad. There's so many little snippets that we talked about today that could be its own episode. So I really hope we're able to have you back to talk a little bit more about social media or other things that you have experience in.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been so lovely. Is there any last thoughts that you have on social media use? Anything you want to share with folks that are listening?
I mean, I think this is a perfect example of, there are definitely benefits to online relationships. And I think there's also a benefit of having face-to-face in-person meetups as well. So I'm glad that I'm glad that you invited me on and that we found the time to do this. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's been great talking about this subject. And you're right, there's lots of areas that we could definitely go off of, but I think this is a good kind of introductory on this subject.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being here. I'm going to post your social media link on our show notes for your practice. And yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.